Hey everybody, and welcome back to Firefall History. I'm sorry it took me so long to get this up, but as I mentioned yesterday in my update video, I've been away for about 5 weeks. I did manage to make it in time for the full launch though, so everything worked out. As far as this patch goes, however, welcome to a released Firefall, everybody. There are lots of people who said we'd never get here, but here we are. This patch reminds me of a quote from Phobos on the earliest patch notes available on the forums. The entire patch notes was, changed everything, added fun. I feel like that phrase is fairly applicable again. After several experiments with progression and crafting, they've finally gone back to their roots with both. The game has a very .5y feel to it that will take a while to get used to for open beta players, but I feel that it came out very well. Rather than go over every single change like I normally do in these videos, I'm going to talk a bit about each of the more broad topics and go into depth where I feel it's appropriate. Let's start out with some of the more exciting stuff. Playable landmass in the game is more than tripled, and for most players at least, there's over 100 hours of new content in the game. Dredge has finally been released, and is approximately the size of New Eden. It's balanced for level 25 to 37, and more on levels later, and features a contrast of a somewhat moderate climate in the north with a desert climate in the south. Due to server restrictions, this area is still on a different SYN, meaning a completely separate shard with separate chat and separated by a loading screen. But at this point, I don't really think anyone's complaining too hard. In addition to Dredge, Diamond Head has also been renamed Devil's Tusk, and the Melting Pushback event has finally begun. Melted Crystite has been replaced with Dark Crystite, although the Melted Crystite in your inventory has not been converted to Dark, it has just been salvaged. With Dark Crystite, you'll be able to craft Dark Crystite cores and contribute them to a permanent repulsor emplacement which will power up when fully charged, unlocking a large portion of the map. I know the plan at one point was for the Chosen to be able to attack the repulsors and lock down parts or all of the zone temporarily. I don't know if that's still the case, but it would be pretty cool to see. I have heard, however, that the plans to build player statues and give the top spot the ability to name the main POI in the zone have been scrapped, so that's a bit disappointing. I also wasn't here in time for the first pushback, but I'll do my absolute best to get the second and third recorded. Oh, and one thing that I should mention is that Antarctica and Sargasso have been removed temporarily because they weren't finished and they served no actual purpose in the game for the time being. You can check out more thoughts about that in whichever blogcast we did with Nakiato, and we talked about that quite extensively. Anyway, the final landmass is Broken Peninsula, which many will be ecstatic to hear is an open-world PvP zone. I'm certainly quite happy with this system, as I'm not the greatest at PvP, and I wasn't a fan of the idea way back when of just turning it into New Eden, or turning it on in New Eden. The way that Broken Pen works is that you're given a zone with watchtowers and bases, and your goal is to take over these installations to get access to the local SYN. Once you have access to the SYN, you can obtain either a small thumper for one of the watchtowers, or one of 3 different sizes of thumpers, a normal personal size, a army sized, or a regular squad sized from one of the bases when they're max level. You can also obtain vehicles from the bases, with levels 1 and 2 bases offering LGVs and level 3 bases offering an MGV. Yes, that's right, an MGV complete with a mounted minigun, basically making it a warthog. The actual details of Broken Pen are a bit more complicated than I intend to touch on here, though I may do a Let's Play episode over it. But the most important things are explained to you over the radio when you jump in, so I encourage you to jump in there and try it for yourself. And that's not all, folks. In addition to all of this new landmass, we have 3 new campaign missions to finish up Chapter 1 of the story, and we also have job boards. Job boards are at each of the major POI in all 3 PvE zones, which each one leading neatly to the next. There are lots of little micro-stories woven between these boards and tons of new characters that are introduced. Ares missions have been scaled back drastically to provide mission areas for the job boards now, though, so it can make the world feel a bit empty at times, and definitely leads to a lot of annoying backtracking a lot of the times as you're going back and forth between the job board and your areas. One of the things I really liked about the Ares mission system is that you could sure could feel grindy at times, but at least you normally didn't have to go very far to get to a new mission. That being said, I do enjoy the amount of depth and importance that has been added to pretty much the entire world, and I couldn't really see how a system like that would be applied to Ares missions. It's really starting to feel like a lot more like a traditional open world game, and honestly I quite like it. You go to NPCs and you get your side quests, and a lot of the side quests are linked together, and I mean a lot of the side quests. So it's a lot of fun. I mean, Era's got a nice voice and all, but sometimes I just want to talk to someone else. And the moment you've all been waiting for since the announcement trailer for Firefall back in 2010, there are finally Titans in this patch. Baneclaw has been moved and likely been given a massive relative buff over its former squishy glory. And we have an entirely new encounter altogether. Neither one will be accessible until after the melding and Devil's Tusk is completely pushed back, however, so it's really hard to say what those are going to be like until we try them. The melding anomaly neutralizer has also been given 2 more core options, probably meaning that a third Titan is not far off, or is already in and I just missed it in the notes. It is important to note that both Baneclaw and the Diamond Head, or Devil's Tusk now, Titan, are mini instances. They are not open world bosses anymore, and the maximum amount of people in these instances are 20 people, so that should also limit the amount of just sheer overpoweredness that you can bring to the fight. That was a big problem with Baneclaw, is that you could get 50 people to do a Baneclaw, and it would literally be down in 30 seconds. It wouldn't have a chance to hit its shield once. Anyway, that about wraps it up for what I wanted to cover for new content. If I missed something that you feel is important, don't forget to leave it in the comments. There is a lot of stuff that went into this patch, and I'm sure I probably missed something. Anyway, it's time to move on to battle frames and terminals. All of the battle frames have undergone some degree of change, and some have changed quite a bit. It's a bit too much to go into here due to the sheer amount of things that have gone into this patch, so I definitely encourage you to check out the patch notes, and of course just give your frames a whirl to see how they feel. The game in general is definitely a lot harder now when playing in your proper zone, so most of the frames will feel like they've been given a relative nerf compared to the environment. Some of the things I do want to get into here, the progression and power have changed drastically. They've done away with constraints completely and replaced them with a mishmash of items that control different stats and interactions. Most notable is that the constraints have been replaced with cores, effectively allowing you to pick one choice stat above all the others, allowing your frame to specialize in whatever you feel is best for it, instead of what you need for items. This also allows them to add more types of choice stats, and they've already taken the opportunity here, as there are now at least 5 to 6, if not more, types of battle frame cores. Not just the 3 that we had before with mass power and CPU. Cores are similar enough to modules too, that I'll go ahead and touch on those here too. Basically, a module is like a core for your weapons or abilities. Higher level items and higher rarity items will have a slot or multicolored slots on them that will allow you to attach various modules that boost specific stats, like the amount of multi-turrets you're able to deploy or the rate of fire on your primary, without crafting a new item. This system essentially replaces stat crafting altogether, as all printer recipes now come in cookie cutter form, and it's easy to customize with modules, and at the higher end of things it is highly recommended that you do. Crafting in general has taken 2 or 3 massive steps backward in importance as well, partly due to the fact that the crafting system is entirely cookie cutter, but also due in large part to the fact that item drops have been increased drastically. And someone's going to shoot me for saying this, they're actually not useless like they used to be. Played around a bit with new content, and I can say that the only troubles I was having weren't directly related to underpowered gear. I was using entirely dropped gear, I didn't even touch the printer. Which is why I'm probably going to be woefully underprepared to talk about the printer here in a few minutes, but that in itself is an extremely nice feeling. Okay, moving on. We have terminals and UI to talk about. By far not the most exciting topic, but still important to talk about. All of the UI in terminals has been changed to some degree. The most notable change for me when I first started playing after the patch was the garage. It basically uses a slightly modified version of the character sheet UI, which can now also be used to change gear in the field. The most annoying part about this change is that now there's absolutely no way to change which frame you are working on in the garage. You'll only ever have access to the frame that you are currently wearing. Frankly, this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to me, because you have to go to a battle frame station to change the frame you're working on, and then back to the garage, and then back to the battle frame station, and then back to the garage if you've got a lot of work to do on frames. I realize that there's probably only a couple of garages in the entire game that aren't right next to a battle frame station. The one in Blackwater is the only sure one that comes to mind, unless that's been changed too. I haven't gotten a chance to go there yet since I've been back, but honestly it feels like a big step back in my opinion. After we've already had this nice unified interface to work on all of our frames at once, I just don't understand the logic behind this choice at all. I could see if it had something to do with not wanting to provide access to changes, the ability to change battle frames in instances, but still want to provide access to change your gear and all that. I can see that. Anyway, like I said, too, however, you have almost the full power of the battle frame garage from anywhere in the field now with the character sheet, which allows you to change gear in the field. About the only use of the garage now is painting your frame and repairing items for crystite. That does bring up another quick point that vets will be very glad to hear. Gear permit breakage is no more. Durability still exists, and the pool of 1000 dura for your item before your item is useless still works the same way. The only difference being is now that no piece of gear that you own will ever degrade to uselessness and not be able to be repaired. If your gun breaks in the field, you can just visit the nearest garage and fix it for crystite. No penalties on the item itself. Frankly, I like this system a lot and really agree with it. It's what they should have done to begin with durability, and it really took this focus shifting away from crafting in the economy to finally make it happen. Anyway, moving on with UI updates, the printer has undergone changes, but they were mainly just to accommodate changes in the recipe and research systems and to remove blending altogether, because there's absolutely no use for blending anymore. The functionality otherwise really hasn't changed at all. On that note, it is important to mention that all of your research has been wiped, and you've been refunded everything you spent on it, including time. That's one thing I really can't believe and have never heard of before, but I have so much respect for Red 5 for doing this. Basically, the way it works is that they have added every second you've ever spent on research and put it in a time bank. So long as you have time in the time bank, every printer job you make will take 10 seconds, with the remaining time for that job being deducted from the bank. You have no option to not use the bank though, so I'd highly recommend that vets use it wisely on research that they really want back first, so they don't get stuck waiting for days for something after they realize, oh shit, I needed that. Crystite and research points also have been refunded, but those work otherwise exactly the same. Professions have also been removed from the equation completely, so there's absolutely no barrier to eventually having a maxed out research tree. Though frankly, with some of the things I really feel that is completely unnecessary. And last but not least, there are a few miscellaneous changes that I felt were notable. First off, LGVs have been split into 3 tiers based on their top speeds in order to make slower models, which have been added in a few places, more accessible to lower level players. Previously, the only way to get an LGV without paying real money was to pay an extreme amount of crystite that most people didn't have until they had a couple of maxed frames already and finally decided to save up for one. Or got lucky with some orange resources and got to sell those on the market. It really created a bit of a wealth gap because those players often had a tricky time getting to Ares missions in some areas. Part of this system also makes the LGV I currently own a dream to handle, as power braking is back in a somewhat limited capacity, but the handling improvements of last time the handling was changed haven't been counteracted at all. On the subject of resources, I suppose I could have gone over this in the section about the printer, but the entire resource system has been overhauled with a new set of resources and obtainment methods. there are now only rarities of resources as opposed to 1,000 qualities. Each rarity also refines a little bit differently. There's still 3 classes of resources, but finding them is actually logical. Instead of pulling everything from biomaterials to gases out of the ground, you get minerals from the ground, biomaterials from creature drops, and electronics from things or people that might have electronics on them. Refining is also a bit different, as there are several tiers of refined goods as opposed to resources simply being refined or unrefined. I'm not perfectly clear on the actual mechanics of refining, but I do know that the more rare the resource, the better the chance you have of getting the rarer refined components back out. Finally, we have glider pads. Red 5 has been having a really tough time with these things, to the point where they have them disabled in all instances because they can simply break the game in quite a few ways. We saw this big time in Blackwater with the ridiculous speed runs. So Red 5 has finally fixed the problem instead of continuing to treat the symptoms. Glider pads now have a universal cooldown of 120 seconds that is shared across all but 2 of the glider pads in the game. The 2 are the Adventurer's Glider Pad, which you receive for visiting all of the locations in New Eden, and the Emergency Glider Pad, which was rewarded to people who donated over 2 million crystite in the pre-release resource migration event. Both of these are on their own separate longer cooldowns, and don't trigger the other cooldowns, thankfully. One bright side to this for those of us, myself included, who span glider pads everywhere we go, certain other past glider pads have been appointed attributes which enhance their functionality. The normal red beam glider pad has been given the quickened attribute, which makes all normal gliders in your inventory fly at a faster rate. In addition, the cherub glider pad has the lofty attribute, which causes your glider pads to launch you higher into the air. And finally, the VIP boosted glider pad gives you a short afterburner at the max height of your jump after stepping on the glider pad. These boosts happen every time you step on your own glider pad or anyone else's, including the generic ones in the world. But other players don't get the same boost from jumping on your pads simply because they have that attribute. Now, this is cool and all, but if they were going to go with an attribute system like this, I kind of wish they'd gone with something where each glider pad had an attribute, but wasn't affected by the others. It'd be sort of like, okay, I want to get up there really quickly, so I use pad X. Or, okay, I need to glide from Thumpin to Sunken, so I'll use pad Y. Anyway, I think that's about it. Even though this was a rather lengthy video, it was still very top level and glossed over a lot of things that have been changed. So go check it out, and don't forget to subscribe here to see the updated Let's Play, which will begin releasing shortly. I'm going to change my scheduling up a bit again to be more consistent, so I'll be recording all the way through Mission 8 in the story before releasing videos. And I'm thinking of releasing them either once or twice a week, depending on what keeps the most interest. This is also just so I don't run into the same thing I've run into in the past, where I run out of time for something and can't get the content out in time to keep up with the schedule. So keep an eye out, guys, and again, don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and dislike it and leave a comment if that's how you feel. And I'll see you guys next time.